I am the Highland scribe, scribe to the stones, to the winds, to the bloodlines that walk unseen. Come closer, closer still. You see, the fire's warm. But this tale tonight, this tale runs wild. Now, have you ever heard of the Kabull? Let me tell you about it. It was a Saturday night, late enough that the roads had thinned and the world had half begun to turn in itself. And my grandfather Isaac and his brother Robert were coming home in the van, taking the long country roads through Angus. They had walked and driven those roads all their lives nearly, and they knew every bend and hollow, every dyke and rise where sheep gathered in the winters. They were talking as folk do when the dark grows thick and the miles pass by easily. Old memories, younger days, stories of the Dunnottar Castle and the ghosts said to linger there. Things they had seen or thought they'd seen. Beasts spoken of in half jest and half in warnings. No laughing though. These were never funny matters. The road curved as it always had. And then all of a sudden, the fog came. Not the rolling in from the field or the burn, no creeping down for the hills, but sort of rising all at once, as though the ground itself had exhaled, thick and heavy, alive, so dense that their headlights died inside it, swallowed whole. Isaac slowed the van, peering forward, trying to find the road that he knew was there. That was when the van was lifted, not skidded, not jolted, lifted, like something had taken it by the belly and set it down somewhere else. The engine died all of a sudden, in the same breath. Now, when Isaac stepped out, the fog wrapped round him like wet wool. He could barely see his own hand in front of his face. Until then, no, as he looked. No, he thought to himself. Nah, that can't be right. The van was no longer on the actual road. It had been placed upon the dyke. Stone and earth beneath, the wheels balancing where no vehicle should ever sit. There was no marks of impact, no broken stones. It just felt wrong. He climbed back into the van, his heart going about 90 miles an hour. Robert was staring at the dashboard clock. Isaac, he said quietly, "Div you ken it's near midnight?" They both knew what that meant, that whatever this was, it was nae accident. The brothers stepped out of the vehicle together and tried to shift the van, boots scraping across the stones, hands braced against the cold metal, the fog pressing in close, muffling sounds swallowing in the distance. And then the bells rang. Once. Twice. And on the third strike, the sound came. It was a deep, rhythmic thudding, like hoofs striking the earth with deliberate weight and force. Then a long, heavy snort, hot and wet, carrying the stink of sulphur and damp hide. They both looked up, and on the rise of the hill stood a shape against the fog, a vast black mass, too large to be cattle, but too tall to be any beast that walked this land. Its eyes burned red, not glowing but burning, like molten iron fresh from the forges. The Kabull had come. Robert ran for the driver's seat and Isaac pushed from behind, panic lending him strength he did not know that he had. The ground beneath his feet began trembling. Then began the charge. It was not a run, it was an earthquake given flesh. The hill shook, the fog split. Isaac closed his eyes as the sound thundered towards him. He felt the breath first, hot, rank, alive. Then the smell again, the weight of it towering over him. When he dared to turn his head, there it stood, a bull, unlike anything born of field or fold. This thing was as large as a bus, with horns stretching the length of a man's arm, hide blacker than night. This was a monster. The clock struck the final mark of midnight. Robert was in the van, praying aloud. The Kabull lowered its head and sniffed Isaac slowly and deliberately, like a butcher testing meat. Its nose brushed against his back pocket, and all of a sudden it recoiled, not in pain, but in recognition. You see, my grandfather always carried his grandfather's Bible in that very pocket. Wasna for show, and not for faith alone. It had been carried before him, and before that again, pressed into service through wars, burials, and nights when the dark came too close. The beast, the Kabull, snorted once, angry, thwarted, and stepped back. Then the fog, it began to thin, and the ground seemed to still. The bells did not ring again, and by morning the van was back on the road as though it had never been touched. They spoke of it then, quietly and seriously, not as men telling tales, but of two men, two brothers, naming what they had survived. You see, they'd heard stories of the Kabull. They'd been told tales of other knock-in and travellers that had come across it. But it was always spoken of in low voices and never written down. You see, a thing that comes from water, but no, because this wasn't a Kelpie, nor a water bull, because there was no water around. And we all know that Kelpies and water bulls never stray far from a loch or a stream. Now, a thing that walks the hours when the souls are counted, a thing that waits for midnight, and for those careless enough to find its path. The old stories were true. They couldn't hardly believe it. They'd survived. But how? How had they survived? they had survived because my grandfather carried what he was carrying. You see, dinna wander lightly through hours that dinna belong to you. Do not mock the old warnings, and never, ever travel dark roads without something that remembers who you are. Because, as my grandfather told me, he escaped it once, but he doubted he ever would have seen it again. And he told me that the Kabull, you see, is a patient beast, where not everyone who meets it gets to return. The legends of old, the warnings, remember them when you're driving down a lonely stretch of road and the clock strikes midnight and a fog begins appearing out of nowhere. But you'll ken it's a wrong kind of fog, 'cause it'll no appear the same way as fog normally does. It'll come upwards, and then you'll ken. And you better hae a Bible with you, because, as far as I'm aware, there is no other way to protect yourself from the Kabull. I am the Highland scribe, scribe to the stones, to the winds, to the bloodlines that walk unseen. And until the fire lights again, sleep tight, wanderers.